It's never too late to join the Jesuits. Well, I feel right at home here, judging from the fact that nobody's sitting up front. I take it you're Catholic. Thank you, Fathers Paul and Stan and Marva and my heroes, Andy and Chip. It's a privilege to be with all of you. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. I have two weddings, a quinceañera and a baptism. Two homies and then two homies' kids, so I have to race. But thank you for all that you do at Holy Name of Jesus. I know I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch, so it's not an enviable spot. But in the last couple days we've been watching Pope Francis, and he likes to talk about the margins, and he says it in a lot of different ways. Yesterday he was talking about the edges. He'll talk about the periphery. And what he's hoping for, of course, is that we have some kind of creation of a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. He knows where we're meant to go and where we're meant to stand. What Martin Luther King used to talk about, the last and the least and the lost. Francis knows that if you stand out at the margins, check under your feet, you'll be noticing that the margins are getting erased precisely because you chose to stand there. And so we're called to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And we're called, all of us in our own way, to dismantle the barriers that exclude. That's what Holy Name of Jesus does for a living, really. And so you stand at the edges, at the margins, at the periphery, and you stand with those poor and powerless and voiceless, and you stand with those whose dignity has been denied, and you stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. Every once in a while you get this very privileged moment to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, and with the demonized, so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable, so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. No matter how singularly focused we may well be on those worthy goals, they actually can't happen unless there's some undergirding sense that we belong to each other. And so our God, we know, is compassionate, loving kindness, and all we're called to do is to be in the world who God is. Apart from Pope Francis, lately I've been thinking about Yogi Berra, because I was a catcher in Little League, and I always loved Yogi Berra, and I always loved later on in life how he mangled the English language. Deja vu all over again. There's a whole list, The homies are really kind of famous for mangling the language, and I always enjoyed that a lot. I had a homegirl come into my office recently, and she was at the end of the day, and her man had come to pick her up, and she introduced me to him, and she said, "This is my sufficient other." No doubt. Not long ago, I kind of turned the reins over of the day-to-day operation of Homeboy to a CEO, a wonderful man named Tom Vosel. And it's nice to just sort of be there and not worry about 10 social enterprises, etc. But not long ago, a homie came into my office and he said, "Damn, gee, my lady, she is in a bad mood today." And I said, "Why?" "Well, she's beginning her administration period." I said, "Well, I'm just ending mine, so I know what she's going through." One of my favorite ones happened when I was presiding at San Fernando Juvenile Hall, and I was at a big gym with like 300 kids, mainly gang members, and I was sitting there, and you know how you decide as a presider, I'm going to just listen to the readings rather than follow along on that little sheet they have, So I had the little hoja, the sheet, resting on my lap, and I closed my eyes, and I was going to listen to the homies proclaim the word, and a kid got up, and I think it was the Psalm And with sort of an overabundance of confidence, he said, "The Lord is exhausted." I said, "What the hell?" And I look at the sheet, and it said, "The Lord is exalted." But I remember at the time thinking, wow, that's way better. You know, I don't know, I don't want to spend eternity with a God for whom it matters that he or she is exalted. You know, I like the exhausted part. Everybody has that experience where you say, "How you feeling?" "I'm exhausted." But, you know, it's a good tired. You know, you've said that. Especially when you have kind of gone out of yourself to do something for the other. And so we're asked to join this exhausted God who loves us without measure and without regret, a God who is in fact too busy loving us to have any time left, exhausted in this unconditional acceptance and love and compassion, and we're asked to do the same thing. So all of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, called enlightened witnesses, people who through your tenderness and kindness and attentive love return people to themselves, the least and the lost and the last. And you stand with them at the margins, and you brace yourselves because the world will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place for which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." And you don't hold the bar up and ask anybody to measure up. You just make those voices heard. You show up and you hold the mirror up and you tell people the truth, knowing that my truth is a gang member's truth, and a gang member's truth is a kid who goes to school at Holy Name of Jesus, and it all happens to be the same truth. And here's the truth: you are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks, the least, the last, and the lost, those on the margins, those on the edges, as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No four prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. I know at Homeboy Industries, part of what we have to do there all the time is reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. In the Acts of the Apostles, you can find all these great metrics and ways of measuring the health of a community. Things like, see how they love one another. That's an excellent one. There's nobody needy in this community. Couldn't be better. My favorite one, though, is an odd one that says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." It would seem that the measure of the health of any community at all may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. Some years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia. And a lot of times, you know, I'll get the letter and I'll say yes, but then I won't have studied the letter very carefully, and I presume maybe it's a keynote, or maybe I open the thing, close the thing, luncheon speaker. And then weeks and weeks and weeks later, I looked at it and I went, oh my God. It was a one-day conference from 9 to 5. It was a gang in-service. I was to be the only speaker at this event. So I invited two homies in real quickly, Andre and Jose, and I sat them down and I said, "You're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up and tell your stories. Take your time." Because we got a long-ass day to fill. But I'd never heard their stories, and Jose got up, 25 years old, gang member, tattooed, been to prison, parolee. Started in our 18-month program in the humble place, you know, cleaning bathrooms, and moved his way up through clerical and one of our 10 social enterprises. But ended up as a valued member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery, a man who had spent a long stretch of time as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. And he got up to tell his story and began in sort of a self-effacing way. He said, well, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers gasped. And he says, it sounds way worse in Spanish. And they did what you did, and he got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. He said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage, and she knocks on the door. And the man comes to the door, and she says, I found this kid, and she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I used to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his ability to speak, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. And now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may be inclined to despise the wounded. Just this last week, and it's fresh in my mind, a homie named Danny, who's one of our trainees, came in to see me. I've known him since he was 15. He's 21 now. He was a knucklehead and into his gang and locked up all the time. And he was one of those people that you may have kept this sort of notion in your head that maybe he won't be able to turn this ship around. In prison for a long stretch. Then he got out, and his mother was dying of cancer, and he sat by her bed for 6 months. And then Danny did something that he had never done in all the years I knew him. He walked into my office. And so he began as a member of our training, 18-month training program. He's been with us now like 6 months. But he came into my office to tell me what had happened the day before. He was on the Gold Line in a packed train. He got a seat. And standing right in front of him, holding onto that pole, was a homie older than he was. He could tell because of the tattoos. But he was a medio pedo, a little bit drunk. And he sees Danny, and he has a huge t-shirt that says Homeboy Industries. And he says, you work there? And Danny says, yeah. And the drunk guy says, any good? Danny says, it's helped me. In fact, I don't think I'll ever go back to prison again because of this place. And then Danny stands, he tells me, And he pulls out a piece of paper and a pen, and he writes on this paper the address at Homeboy Industries, and he says to me, I couldn't believe I knew it by heart. And he hands it to the medio drunk guy, and the guy stares at it, and he says, thank you. And the train comes to a stop, and the guy gets off the train. And then Danny sits, and then he says to me, what happens next has never happened to me in my life. He says that the whole train staring at him, and they're all nodding, and they're all smiling. And then he fills up with tears, and he can barely say this last part. And for the first time in my life, I felt admired. And the soul feels its worth. And he becomes and inhabits the truth of who he is, exactly what God had in mind. And so we join this amazing task of our exhausted God, to love without measure and without regret, and to in fact be too busy loving to have any time for disappointment or disapproval or anything else. And you stand at the margins with the last and the least and the lost, and you brace yourself, because who's not going to accuse you of wasting your time? But in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And so we make those voices heard today. Thank you all very much.